If you've ever smiled through exhaustion, hoping someone would notice, this moment will hurt. The receipt lies flat on the counter, still warm from the printer, the ink screaming one quiet line. Tip, $0. Her fingers hover, shaking just enough to betray how long this night has been. For a second, she considers leaving it there, pretending she didn't see it. Because that missing tip isn't just money. It's tomorrow's groceries. It's gas to get to work. It's the knot in your chest when you tell your child, again, that maybe next week will be better. This isn't about generosity. It's about dignity. Something else is still on the table, though, tucked beneath the plate, unnoticed by everyone except her. Not money. Not kindness. Something far more dangerous and life-altering. Before we go further, tell us where you're watching from, and subscribe. Because this story doesn't end the way you think. And what she found under that plate wasn't meant to be found. Her name isn't important, but we'll call her Emily. She's 43, a single mother, and she's worked this diner off Route 17 for almost a decade. Same vinyl booths, same burnt coffee smell, same bell over the door that rings even when nobody comes in. Tonight started like any other double shift. Her feet already hurt by noon, and by dinner she was counting steps just to stay awake. The couple in booth 7 didn't look unusual. Middle-aged, well-dressed, polite but distant. They ordered grilled chicken, shared a slice of pie, barely spoke. Emily refilled their water twice, smiled when they nodded, and wished them a good night. When they left, the bell rang once, sharp and final. That's when she saw the receipt. $0. She swallowed hard, felt that familiar mix of shame and anger, and reached to clear the table. The plate scraped softly as she lifted it. And that's when her fingers brushed something folded, stiff, and not meant for her. At first she thought it was a napkin. Then she saw the seal. Official. Government issue. Her breath caught. She looked around, heart thudding, but the diner was quiet, just the hum of the fridge and the distant sound of a truck passing outside. Emily unfolded the paper with the care you'd use on something fragile. It was a notice, an investigation summary, names redacted, addresses partially blacked out. But one line stood out, clear as day. The address. Her address. The same apartment she'd lived in for 6 years. The same place her son did homework at the kitchen table. For a moment, she laughed under her breath, that nervous laugh you make when reality feels wrong. This can't be mine, she thought. But it was. Down to the apartment number. Her hands went cold. She folded it back up and slipped it into her apron, telling herself she'd deal with it later. But how do you keep serving coffee when your life just shifted under your feet? What would you do if you found something like that? Would you ignore it? Or would curiosity pull you in? 6 months earlier, before any of this, Emily's life was quiet in a way that only working parents understand. Wake up early, pack lunches, drop her son, Jacob, at school, work all day, collapse into bed. She didn't have secrets, or at least she didn't think she did. The only unusual thing was the mail. Letters addressed to people who didn't live there. Official envelopes that made her uneasy. She'd return them, unopened. Wrong address, she'd write, neat and polite. She never imagined someone was watching. That the couple in booth 7 weren't strangers at all, but part of something bigger. Sitting at that table, they'd watched her movements, her habits, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was tired. That paper wasn't a mistake. It was dropped. Intentionally. A test. And now Emily was part of a story she never agreed to be in. That night, after her shift, she sat in her car with the engine off, the diner lights glowing behind her. She read the document again under the dome light. Words like surveillance, suspected involvement, and pending review stared back at her. Her chest tightened. Involvement in what? She whispered. She hadn't broken any laws. She barely had time to breathe. She thought of Jacob sleeping at home, his backpack by the door. Fear isn't loud at first. It's small. It asks questions. Who thinks I did something? Why? And what happens next? Emily drove home slowly, checking her mirrors more than usual. That night, she didn't sleep. She lay awake listening to the building settle, every sound suddenly meaningful. Have you ever felt that shift, when the world feels familiar but unsafe at the same time? 2 weeks later, the knock came. 3 sharp taps. It was early. Jacob was still in bed. Emily opened the door to 2 people who looked like they belonged anywhere but her hallway. Calm voices. Polite smiles. Questions that sounded simple but weren't. They asked about her neighbors. About packages. About people she might have seen coming and going. Emily answered honestly, her voice steady even as her hands trembled. When they left, one of them paused. You did the right thing, he said. She wanted to ask what that meant. She didn't. Over the next month, the truth came out piece by piece. Her apartment had been used, years before she moved in, as a drop point in a larger fraud case. Paperwork never updated. Files never closed properly. Her return mail? That had kept the address active in the system. The investigation wasn't about her. But it almost was. The turning point came the day she was officially cleared. A letter arrived, this one addressed correctly, apologizing for the distress caused. Emily sat at the same kitchen table where Jacob did his homework and cried. Not loud, just enough to let it out. Relief mixed with anger. Because if that paper had been ignored, if she hadn't found it, things could have gone very differently. Weeks later, she was back at work, another long shift, another tired smile. A different customer left a note this time. No money again. Just words. Thank you for being kind when you didn't have to be. Emily folded it carefully and put it in her pocket. Dignity doesn't always come with cash. Sometimes it comes with being seen. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And then if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. As you think about Emily, ask yourself this. How many moments in your own life felt small at the time but changed everything? How often do we judge a single action without knowing the weight behind it? Emily still works that diner. Jacob is older now. The mail is normal again. But every time she sees a receipt, she remembers how close she came to being defined by a mistake that wasn't hers. And she hopes, quietly, that the next person who smiles through exhaustion gets noticed before it hurts. Marisol Hayes is 32 years old, and by most definitions, she has done everything she was supposed to do. She works hard. She shows up early. She leaves late. She doesn't drink, doesn't gamble, doesn't waste money she doesn't have. She is a single mother with a 4-year-old child who believes his mom can fix anything, and that belief alone is sometimes heavier than the trays she carries all day. Marisol works double shifts at a diner just outside the city, the kind of place where the booths stick to your skin in summer and the coffee never quite tastes fresh. There is no safety net under her life. No family to call when the car makes a strange sound. No savings account waiting quietly in the background. Just tomorrow, and the hope that tomorrow will cooperate. Most nights in the same way. Her child asleep on the couch because bedtime came and went while she was still working. Shoes by the door, tiny socks balled up like they lost the will to try. Marisol sits at the small kitchen table with a handful of quarters, dimes, and pennies spread out in front of her. She stacks them slowly, counting twice because being wrong costs more than pride. Rent first. Daycare next. What's left decides dinner. Sometimes it's chicken if she's lucky. Most nights it's mac and cheese again. She kneels down, looks her child in the eyes, and says, "I'm sorry, okay? Just for tonight." Her child smiles and says it's his favorite, and that almost hurts more than if he complained. At work, Marisol wears kindness like a uniform. She knows which customers want extra napkins without asking. She remembers who drinks cream with their coffee and who pretends not to notice when their card gets declined. She apologizes even when things aren't her fault. The grill is backed up. The cook is short-tempered. The order is wrong. "I'm so sorry," she says again and again, because saying it feels safer than not. There is a quiet shame in needing kindness and not receiving it. In smiling when your feet ache and realizing no one is looking back long enough to see you. If you've ever done everything right and still come up short, this part matters. Marisol's mornings start before the sun. She dresses quietly so she doesn't wake her child, tying her apron strings with muscle memory. The bus ride smells like cold air and perfume. She stares out the window, thinking about nothing and everything at once. At the diner, she pours coffee for people heading to jobs with benefits and sick days, people who complain about the smallest inconveniences. She listens. She nods. She keeps moving. By afternoon, her back tightens. By evening, her smile feels like something she has to hold up with effort. She doesn't complain. Complaints don't pay bills. Complaints don't keep lights on. There are moments she doesn't talk about, like the day her child asked why other kids have both parents at pickup, or the time she pretended not to hear coworkers laughing about tips while she calculated whether she could afford laundry soap this week. She tells herself this is temporary, that she just needs one break, one normal week. She believes it because not believing it would mean facing how fragile everything really is. And fragility is exhausting when you're already tired. That night, the receipt felt like confirmation of something she tries not to think about. 0. Not even an apology scribbled in the margin. Just a quiet reminder that effort doesn't always get noticed. Marisol stood there longer than she should have, holding that piece of paper like it weighed something. She thought about the groceries she planned in her head during her shift, the gaslight that came on yesterday, the guilt that shows up uninvited when you're doing your best and still feel like you're failing. That receipt wouldn't break her. She had survived worse. But what came next almost did. Because under that plate was proof that her life was being touched by forces she didn't understand. Something that didn't care how careful she was, or how honest, or how hard she worked. In that moment, Marisol wasn't just tired. She was vulnerable. And vulnerability doesn't announce itself loudly. It waits. It watches. It chooses moments like this, when your guard is down and your hands are full. As you listen, ask yourself this. How close have you come to the edge without realizing it? And who would notice if you slipped? 2 nights later, he came in just before the dinner rush slowed. The bell above the door rang once, clean and deliberate, and for reasons Marisol couldn't explain, she noticed him immediately. He wasn't loud. He didn't look around like he was measuring the room. He simply chose a booth near the window and sat down, posture relaxed, hands resting on the table as if he had nowhere else to be. Polite people usually blend in at the diner. This man didn't stand out because of what he did. He stood out because of what he didn't do. No phone. No impatience. Just quiet attention. He ordered simply. Meatloaf. Water. No substitutions. No rush. When Marisol brought the plate, he thanked her by name, reading it once from her badge and never looking again. His voice was calm, even, the kind that doesn't ask for space but somehow gets it anyway. She nodded and moved on, telling herself she was imagining things. But she wasn't. She noticed how he tipped the other servers when they refilled his water, how he complimented the cook when the plate came out hot. "Smells good tonight," he said, just loud enough to be heard. The cook smiled, surprised. When it came time to pay, he paid cash. Neat bills. No hesitation. And then there was Marisol. He looked directly at her, held her gaze for a second longer than necessary, and said nothing extra. No smile. No comment. Just a look, steady and unreadable. That was the first night. The second night, he came again. Same booth. Same order. Same quiet presence. Marisol told herself it was coincidence. People have routines. Regulars are normal. But this felt different. Not threatening. Not friendly either. Just intentional. She caught herself watching him when she should have been refilling coffee. There was something in the way he listened to the room, like he wasn't just hearing words, but weighing them. Conversations at nearby tables. The rhythm of footsteps behind the counter. The timing of the register opening and closing. He didn't interrupt. He absorbed. The micro details started to stack up, the kind you only notice when your instincts won't let something go. His watch was old-fashioned, the kind you don't see much anymore, worn but cared for. He checked it once, exactly once, then slid his sleeve back down. When the receipt came, he didn't glance at it the way most people do. He folded it carefully, twice, pressing the crease with his thumb as if precision mattered. Marisol felt something tighten in her chest, a quiet sense of being observed without being judged. It made her want to straighten her apron, to move a little faster, to get everything right. Viewers listening now might feel it too, that protective pull. The question forming without words. Why is he different with her? He never crossed a line, never asked a personal question, never lingered in conversation. But when he looked at Marisol, it felt like he was seeing more than the surface. As if he knew something about her life she hadn't said out loud. That feeling followed her home. She noticed it while brushing her teeth, while locking the door, while checking on her child, asleep and peaceful, unaware of the weight shifting around them. On the third night, another server joked about him. "Your quiet guy's back," she said, half smiling. Marisol forced a laugh. "He's not my guy," she replied, a little too quickly. The word stayed with her. My guy? As if ownership was already being assigned. As if presence alone could create connection. She told herself she was tired. That exhaustion makes meaning where there is none. But exhaustion also sharpens instincts. It strips away the noise and leaves you with what matters. And what mattered was this. He noticed things other people didn't. He noticed when Marisol swapped shifts. He noticed when she seemed distracted. He noticed when her smile slipped for half a second before she caught it again. He didn't comment. He just watched. Not hungrily. Not with pity. With focus. The kind that asks questions without speaking them. And each night, when he left, the booth felt emptier than it should have. The air cooler. As if something unfinished had been set down and left behind on purpose. Marisol couldn't explain why she felt uneasy. Nothing bad had happened. Nothing inappropriate. But fear doesn't always arrive with noise. Sometimes it arrives dressed as curiosity. Sometimes it sits quietly across from you, folds its receipt neatly, and walks out without a trace. What Marisol didn't know was that this wasn't about money at all. The night he didn't come back for a refill was the night everything dropped. The booth by the window sat empty longer than usual, the vinyl seat still warm, the plate cleared away, the faint smell of coffee hanging in the air like a question nobody answered. Marisol noticed before she meant to. She always did. Some absences announced themselves. This one didn't. It waited. The bell over the door never rang again. No footsteps. No quiet presence sliding past the counter. Just space where someone had been. When she walked over to wipe the table, the receipt was still there, untouched, lying flat like it had been placed carefully on purpose. She didn't pick it up right away. She stood there longer than she should have, rag in hand, listening to the diner breathe around her. The low hum of the refrigerator, silverware clinking somewhere behind her. A laugh from a booth she wasn't assigned to. Life continuing, unbothered. When she finally reached for the paper, her fingers felt heavier than usual. She flipped it over slowly, already bracing herself, already negotiating the disappointment in her head. Maybe he forgot. Maybe he thought cash on the table was enough. Maybe it was an accident. The number stared back at her without explanation. Tip, $0. Silence sat between her thoughts. She let it stay there. She didn't curse, didn't sigh. She just felt it. The way disappointment spreads quietly, like cold through thin fabric. The way it makes you question moments you didn't question before. Had she missed something? Was her smile too tired? Did she rush his plate? Did she forget the extra napkin? Her mind replayed the shift in fragments, searching for a mistake that would make this make sense. There's a special kind of humiliation in trying to find fault in yourself when no one else has accused you. It's quiet. It doesn't ask permission. Marisol folded the receipt once, then unfolded it again. She could hear her own heartbeat in her ears. Other servers talked nearby, counting tips, comparing tables. She stayed still, eyes down, telling herself this was normal. This happened. Not everyone tipped. She knew that. She told herself she was stronger than a number on a piece of paper. But strength doesn't erase feeling. It just teaches you how to carry it without dropping everything else. She thought about walking outside, catching him before he reached his car. She could ask, lightly, if everything was okay. She could remind him, gently. People did it all the time. She didn't. Because confronting him wouldn't give her what she needed. It wouldn't restore dignity. It would trade it for explanation, and she didn't want that exchange. So she did what she always did. She straightened the table. She wiped the booth clean. She tucked the receipt away and went back to work. Her face stayed calm. Her voice stayed even. No one noticed anything different. And that, somehow, made it worse and better at the same time. Later, in the bathroom, she stared at her reflection under fluorescent lights that showed everything and softened nothing. Get it together, she whispered, more tired than angry. She washed her hands longer than necessary, watching the water run, reminding herself that this shift would end, that tomorrow would come whether she was ready or not. She walked back out, picked up a tray, and kept moving. The choice not to confront him felt small in the moment, almost invisible, but restraint has a way of echoing forward. That restraint is why what happened next mattered. She came back to the booth the way she always did, on autopilot, cloth in one hand, plate in the other. It was only when she lifted it that she felt it. Not the weight of food, but resistance. Subtle. Wrong. The plate didn't rise cleanly from the table. It tugged back, just slightly, like something underneath didn't want to let go. Marisol froze. For half a second, she thought maybe it was dried sauce, maybe gum, maybe nothing at all. But instinct doesn't argue politely. It speaks once and expects to be heard. She glanced around before she did anything else. The register was busy. A couple laughed near the counter. The cook had his back turned. No one was looking at her. Her pulse picked up anyway. Slowly, carefully, she tilted the plate and saw it. Something pale taped neatly underneath. Folded. Square edges. Deliberate. Not money. Not a handwritten note. Not anything a normal customer leaves behind. Her fingers hovered in the air, the same way they had hovered over that receipt earlier, caught between wanting answers and being afraid of them. Marisol stood there longer than she should have. Her mind raced through explanations, all of them small and harmless, all of them unconvincing. A prank. A mistake. Someone else's table. But she knew where this came from. She felt it in her chest, that tight, inward pull of recognition without understanding. She slid the plate onto the tray, carried it to the service station, and peeled the tape away with care she didn't realize she had. The paper underneath was heavier than it looked. Thicker. Official in a way that made her throat dry. She unfolded it once. Then again. She read the first line and sat down. Not because she wanted to. Because her legs stopped working. The noise of the diner faded into something distant and dull, like she was underwater. Words swam in front of her eyes, sharp and unmistakable even without full context. Formal language. Dates. References. Her name appeared once. Then again, printed cleanly as if it had always belonged there. She didn't read the whole thing. She couldn't. She folded it back up, hands shaking now, and pressed it flat against the counter like that might keep it from becoming real. She didn't cry. Fear doesn't always look like tears. Sometimes it looks like stillness. Sometimes it looks like a woman sitting on a milk crate behind a counter, staring at a wall, wondering how a life this careful could be touched by something this big. Questions crowded in without answers. Who was he? Why her? What did this mean for her child sleeping at home? For the job she couldn't afford to lose? For the quiet life she thought she understood? She slipped the paper into her apron and stood up when someone called her name. Her voice worked when she answered. That scared her most. The rest of the shift passed in fragments. Orders taken. Plates delivered. Smiles given. Inside, something had shifted permanently. When she locked up that night, she checked the parking lot twice before walking to her car. She didn't turn the radio on. She drove home in silence. Every streetlight suddenly too bright, every shadow too specific. At home, she watched her child sleep longer than usual, memorizing the rise and fall of his chest like proof of something solid in a world that suddenly wasn't. She didn't read the paper again that night. She tucked it into a drawer beneath old bills and takeout menus and closed it gently. Morning came anyway. Breakfast needed making. Shoes needed tying. Life didn't pause just because her understanding of it had cracked. The next day, she went back to work like nothing had happened. Same apron, same booth, same routine. But tension has a way of simmering even when no one stirs it. And whatever had been taped under that plate wasn't finished with her yet. The answers didn't come from the paper in her drawer. They came 3 days later, in pieces, the way truths usually do when they don't want to be understood all at once. Marisol recognized him first on a muted television above the counter. The volume was low, captions rolling beneath a morning news segment. A profile. A familiar face. Calm eyes. Same posture. Different context. The headline talked about a self-made billionaire who avoided interviews, who funded schools and hospitals through shell foundations, who gave away millions without attaching his name. They called him private. They called him intentional. Some said he was known for testing character, for placing people in uncomfortable situations to see who they really were. Marisol felt the room tilt slightly as she wiped the counter. That was him, the man from the booth. But this wasn't a test. Not in the way the headlines suggested. Tests are clean. Controlled. What had been left under that plate was neither. The document wasn't symbolic. It was real. It connected her name to something she didn't understand, something that could ruin her life if handled wrong. She learned more that night, searching quietly after her child fell asleep, reading articles with care, piecing together patterns. He had once lived in her building years ago, before the money, before the distance. A case had followed him then. Financial misconduct accusations that never stuck but never fully disappeared. Addresses flagged. Names logged. Hers caught in the residue of someone else's past. The zero tip began to make sense in a way that made her stomach turn. He needed her to notice what was hidden. A normal tip would have ended the night like any other. The absence forced attention. It created silence. Privacy. He couldn't hand it to her. Cameras. Witnesses. He needed sincerity, not performance. He needed to know how she would respond when no one was watching, when there was nothing to gain. What he didn't expect was restraint. He expected anger. A confrontation. A scene he could manage, explain, control. Instead, she kept her dignity. That choice complicated everything. Because now she wasn't just a name on a document. She was a variable he hadn't accounted for. Marisol didn't go to the press. She didn't post online. She didn't threaten. She didn't reach out at all. She read. She listened. She waited. Waiting isn't passive when you're protecting something. It's active. It's deliberate. She understood the gray area she was standing in. He had put her there without consent, even if his intentions weren't cruel. Power does that. It blurs lines and calls it necessity. A week later, he came back. Same booth. Same order. This time, when he looked at her, there was something else in his expression. Not confidence. Assessment. When she brought the plate, their hands didn't touch. He spoke quietly, Finally, "You didn't say anything," he said. It wasn't a question. Marisol met his gaze, steady despite the pounding in her chest. "I didn't think it was my place," she replied. The truth, simple and unadorned. That answer landed heavier than any accusation could have. He nodded once, slowly, like someone recalibrating. What she did instead of reacting the way he expected altered the balance between them. It shifted control from spectacle to substance. He had money, influence, distance. She had something rarer in that moment. Integrity without audience. The open document in her drawer remained untouched, not as leverage, but as evidence of a line she refused to cross unless forced. That restraint unsettled him more than anger ever could. Because anger can be predicted, dignity cannot. What she did instead changed the outcome forever. The paper stayed where she put it, folded neatly, hidden among things no one ever looks at twice. But it didn't stay quiet. Marisol felt it every time she opened that drawer, every time she paid a bill, every time her child asked for something she couldn't immediately say yes to. The document could change her life. One phone call, one email, one decision. It could erase debt, create safety, build a future that didn't depend on luck or late tips. And at the same time, it could destroy his. Reputations don't survive certain truths, even old ones. Especially when money and silence have kept them buried. That weight followed her through her shifts, through bedtime stories, through the small hours of the night when sleep didn't come easily. Legal risk sat on one side of the scale. What if the document implicated her just enough to pull her into something she couldn't afford? What if doing nothing was the greater danger? On the other side was moral risk. Using information that was never meant for her. Benefiting from someone else's vulnerability, even if that vulnerability came wrapped in power. And beneath it all was the emotional burden. The quiet knowledge that whatever she chose would shape the kind of person her child would one day believe she was. She didn't announce her questions. She asked quietly, carefully, the way you do when you're not sure you want the answer. She called her sister first, late at night, voice low so little ears wouldn't hear. She didn't explain everything, just enough. If you had something that could fix everything, she asked, but it would hurt someone else, what would you do? Her sister was silent for a long moment. I'd think about who I want to be after, she said finally. It wasn't an answer. It was a mirror. A former coworker offered something different. People like that don't get there by accident, she said. If you can protect yourself, you should. Practical. Hard. Still not clear. Every piece of advice bent the decision in a different direction. No one told her what to do because no one could. This wasn't a problem with a right solution. It was a collision of survival and conscience. And those don't resolve neatly. Marisol sat alone at the kitchen table that night. The documents spread out in front of her for the first time in days. She traced the words with her finger without really reading them. She thought about her child's future, about safety, about sleep that comes without fear. She also thought about the man in the booth, about power misused and intentions that don't erase impact. She asked herself the only question that mattered. What would you do? Would you choose relief now, or restraint that might cost you everything later? The clock on the stove clicked over to midnight. The quiet felt heavier than usual. She folded the paper once more and placed it back in the drawer. She had 24 hours to decide. Marisol didn't sleep that night. She didn't pace or cry or rehearse speeches in the mirror. She did something quieter than all of that. She decided. By morning, the choice had settled into her bones with a strange calm. She wasn't going to sell the document. She wasn't going to expose him. And she wasn't going to keep carrying something that never belonged to her. Instead, she sat at the small kitchen table while her child slept and wrote a letter in her own careful handwriting. No threats, no demands, just truth. She wrote about dignity, about how easy it is to forget it matters when money is involved. She wrote about being seen, not as a problem to solve or a behavior to measure, but as a person trying to live an honest life. She told him she didn't need to be tested to deserve respect, that leaving her with silence and zero felt heavier than he probably understood. That power doesn't excuse fear, and intention doesn't erase impact. She didn't accuse him of cruelty. She told him what it felt like to be on the other side of his curiosity. She ended the letter simply, thanking him for correcting the mistake that tied her name to his past, and asking him never to put someone else in that position again. That afternoon, she mailed the document back with the letter tucked neatly inside. No return address beyond her name. No explanation attached. Just closure offered without condition. When she dropped it into the slot, she stood there for a moment longer than necessary, listening to the envelope disappear. It felt like letting go of something heavy she'd been carrying without realizing how much it weighed. Days later, in a quiet office far from the diner, he opened it alone. No assistants, no advisors, just him and the words of a woman he thought he understood. He read the letter once, then again. The room was silent in the way it had been when he folded that receipt, when he walked out without tipping, when he assumed control meant clarity. This time, silence didn't feel like strategy. It felt like reflection. Full circle, weeks passed. The days blended together in the diner's fluorescent light, the hum of the refrigerators, the clatter of silverware, the routine of taking orders and pouring coffee. Nothing changed immediately. No phone calls, no sudden meetings, no explanations. The world outside kept turning, and Marisol kept moving through it with the same careful grace she always had. She didn't wait for reward. She didn't expect it. She had already made her choice. Then, slowly, the universe nudged her in ways she hadn't anticipated. A scholarship fund appeared in her child's name, completely anonymous, covering early education costs she hadn't dreamed she could afford. An unexpected donation arrived at the diner, earmarked for staff development, giving her coworkers small lifts she knew were connected to the same quiet source. And finally, an opportunity emerged, a position she could accept on her own terms, one that respected her time, her dignity, and her life outside the diner. It didn't feel like she had been saved. That's not what happened. What had happened was far more subtle, far more powerful. She had been recognized. Her effort, her patience, her integrity, the choices she made when no one else was watching. The world didn't hand her a miracle. It simply acknowledged the weight she carried and the quiet strength with which she carried it. And in that recognition, she found something deeper than any tip, any paycheck, or any favor, a sense of being truly seen. Sometimes the test isn't about what you give, but what you choose not to take. Marisol's story reminds us that strength isn't measured in action alone, but in restraint, in holding on to your dignity even when no one is watching, even when the world seems ready to demand otherwise. If you were in her place, would you have done the same? Would you have returned the document, kept silent, trusted your own judgment over anger or fear? Think about that for a moment. If this story stayed with you, like it stayed with us, take a moment to like, comment, and subscribe. Share how it made you feel, where you're watching from, and stay tuned, because more stories like this are coming, each one reminding us how ordinary people face extraordinary moments, and how the smallest choices can change everything.